Mike Russell, who we just heard there, says implied that the EU single market is more important than the UK single market. Why is that?
Well, I think they're both important to Scotland. It's a little known fact, this, but Scotland is actually England's biggest export destination. So our aim is to remain part of the EU single market and the UK single market.
But why would the EU single market, in Mr. Russell's mind, be more important than the UK single market?
Well, I think what Mike is getting at is the fact that for us at the moment, the growth market is the EU. Scotland's exports to the EU are growing.
How much do you export to the EU?
I can't give you the precise figures, Andrew,
okay,
but they are significant.
It's 12 billion.
Yeah.
Just under 12 billion,
okay.
11.6. How much do you export to the rest of the UK?
Last year we exported about 46 billion and the rest of the UK exported into Scotland about 52 billion. Mm. So you will see that Scotland is actually a bigger export market for the rest of the UK. Now what's important
No, hold on. You just admitted the actual figure last year was 48.5 billion.
Well, I'm looking at the most recent quarterly statistics.
Well, the most recent ones are coming out today, or this week. I've not yet seen them. 48.5 billion to the rest of the UK versus 12 billion to the rest of the EU. In other words, your exports to the rest of the UK are 4 times your exports to the EU. In what way can the EU single market be more important than the UK single market?
Because as I've said to you, it's our growth market.
But it's 4 times bigger than the UK.
You're positing this question to me as though we had to make a choice between the EU single market and the UK single market. David Davies went to Ireland and went to Dublin and spoke to businessmen and businesswomen in Dublin recently, and he said that the Republic of Ireland will not need to choose after Brexit between its commitment to the UK and its commitment to the EU. We believe that if Scotland stays in the single market and the rest of the UK does not, then Scotland will not and should not have to choose between its commitment to the EU and the rest of the UK as trading markets. And my point in saying to you, and I think we weren't far off in our figures, I said it was 46 billion from Scotland to England and England to Scotland to 52 billion. My point there, Andrew, was that Scotland is England's biggest export market. It would be a kamikaze action for the English and the rest of the UK to put up a hard border between Scotland and England. We're not interested in creating a hard border between Scotland and England. What we're interested in is respecting the wishes of the Scottish people to remain in the EU. I heard you talking about a veto earlier. We're not interested in a veto. We believe that the wishes of the rest of the UK, England and Wales, not Northern Ireland, to leave the EU must be respected in the same way that the wishes of the Scots to remain should be respected. That's why we've put forward this compromise proposal that my colleague Mike Russell is currently discussing in the Joint Ministerial Committee. Now that compromise, you'll see, Andrew, that you'll know that we suggested that the whole of the UK could remain in a single market.
Yeah, but that's now been ruled out.
Theresa May ruled that out on Tuesday in her speech. One might question her motives in
but it's ruled out, so it's not going to happen.
But our fallback position was that Scotland should remain in the single market.
And the Spanish have said that's not going to happen.
Well, the Spanish may have said that it's not going to happen, but the Spanish, like the rest of us, are going into a negotiation. And we heard Theresa May specifically talk about the wishes of the Spanish fishermen to have access to the fisheries around the United Kingdom. So people might state what their ideal position is in any negotiation, but there is room for give and take.
Well, the Secretary of State for Europe in Spain, there's only one negotiator, that's the UK government. If the UK leaves the single market, the whole of the UK leaves the single market.
Well, that's one voice out of 27 other EU member states.
You need all 27, that's quite a strong one.
And that is why I and my colleagues have been travelling around the European Union since the Brexit vote, speaking to other member states. Now, let's just look at the Spanish situation in particular. On the fringes of Spain, we have Gibraltar. Gibraltar is in a slightly anomalous position. Gibraltar voted overwhelmingly to remain part of the European Union. Gibraltar is in the EU, but it's not in the customs union. The Channel Islands are in the customs union, but not in the EU. There is existing scope and precedent for differential arrangements. Now, we are in completely uncharted territory. No member state has previously voted to leave the EU.
Of course, we know
so that's uncharted territory. Equally, the proposals which Scotland have put forward, the Scottish Government have put forward, are uncharted territory.
Well, but hold on, your proposals basically proposed the devolution of almost everything to the Scottish Parliament. Immigration, separate business regime, the corporation tax, everything. It's basically a blueprint for independence. The British government is not going to agree to that.
Well, let's see what the British government will do.
But you would need a hard border if you had that.
Well, no, because
immigration?
David Davies has told us that when Britain leaves the European Union and the Republic of Ireland remains a member, there will be no hard border between North and South.
But the Republic of Ireland is not a member of Schengen. You would be a new member of the European Union. That may be the price you would have to pay.
The Republic of Ireland is a member of the Common Travel Area, which has been in existence before the European Union and which Scotland has been a member of since way before the European Union. So what we are looking for here in our compromise proposals is a compromise in a situation of uncharted
It's not a compromise.
territory.
It's a demand for independence by the back door.
Well, no, it's not, Andrew.
Well, one of the people sitting on the council, Sir Charles Grant, who was involved in this process you went through, said that these plans are not legally, politically or technically feasible.
Equally, David Edwards, my former tutor and distinguished former judge at the European Court of Justice, who sits on the panel, has said that the proposals should be looked at seriously. Now, that's one of the finest legal brains.
Let me bring Douglas Carswell in here. I mean, Scotland didn't vote to leave the European Union. It's now having to leave the European Union and the single market. You can understand why they're upset.
Well, I suspect that some in the SNP would see any event as a pretext to call for a second referendum. But, you know, I think it's important to remember that more people in Scotland voted to stay in the UK, just over 2 million, than voted to remain in the EU. We made the decision as a united kingdom on our EU membership, and, you know, my side won that vote in the referendum.
They were promised.
And I'm sorry that you lost your referendum.
Yes, but Ruth Davidson and Alistair Darling promised us in Scotland that if we voted to remain part of the UK, we would remain part of the EU. That promise has now been broken. The circumstances have changed. And that's what we are looking at. How do we deal with these changed circumstances?
Indeed it has, and that's a very important point, because that was said that the way to stay in the EU was to vote for Scotland to stay in the UK, and that clearly has now. I've run a very quick question for you. On the current timetable, Britain is scheduled to leave the EU in March 2019. Will there be a referendum on Scottish independence before then?
Whether or not there'll be a referendum depends on the British government's response to our proposals in the detailed document Scotland's Place in Europe. That's what's under discussion in the Joint Ministerial Committee this morning. We do not know, but if they ditch those proposals and don't look at them seriously, it's very likely that there will be another independence referendum. The First Minister has said it will not be this year. We'll need to see how the timetable unfolds thereafter.
Well, that would only leave 2018.
Well, we need to see how the timetable unfolds thereafter.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.